just
Good.
that'll just keep track of what's going on. So. Ready? Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Want to welcome those who are joining us live on Facebook Live as we live stream this interview. Thank you, Senator, for agreeing to do this as a live stream today. Thanks for coming in and agreeing to answer some questions from the Tribune Eagle. When we heard that you were available and that you were willing to come by, we did throw it open to our readers and ask them to submit some questions that they would have for you. And so we've got a bunch of questions from our readers and then some that we have as well. So I'll let James Chilton, our government reporter, start off.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for agreeing to sit down and speak with us. We all know how important it is to be able to communicate with and ask questions of our elected representatives. With that in mind, I'd like to note that many of our readers submitted questions specifically asking about your plans to address them directly. We're unaware of any in-person town halls arranged by your staff for this current Senate recess, and we would like to know, do you plan to hold any town hall meetings with constituents in the near term?
You know, I don't hold town hall meetings anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I hold listening sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives people a chance to speak to me. I found that most of the people are not interested in what I'm saying. They've already heard a lot about what I'm saying. What they want is to deliver their message, and we're trying to figure out as many different ways as we can to get their message to us. Something we've had a problem with this year is people from other states jamming up our phone lines, jamming up our internet, jamming up everything, and keeping Wyoming citizens from being able to get messages to us. I get several hundred voicemails a day. That's from the overflow from the two people that answer the phones all day. And it takes 4 more people all day to go through those, because we do look at everything to make sure that I'm getting the messages that the people from Wyoming want me to get.
And when you say listening sessions, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what those are?
Yes, I sit at a table with pad and paper, and there's a microphone in front of me, and people come up one at a time and speak in the microphone, and I make notes. And at the end of about 45 minutes, or what seems to be running down, then I make a few comments about the questions that were asked, the comments that were made, and I promise to review all of them that I took down, because every person that has a comment for me is important. Now, I may not agree with it, I may not be able to use it, but it's part of the weighing all the factors.
And so these listening sessions, when do you have any coming up in Wyoming?
I haven't been able to schedule anything because we don't know what our schedule is in Washington. We're still trying to get cabinet members through. This is the first president that hasn't had all the cabinet members through in the first 3 weeks. 2 weeks ago, there'd been less than George Washington. That's how far back it's been since it's been delayed this long. Normally, a president gets the people that he nominates, and they go through fairly smoothly. It takes about a week sometimes. We just got the director of the budget through last week. He was supposed to have the president's budgets to us the first Monday in February. Normally, that's one of those kind of automatic appointments. I mean, he doesn't really make any decisions. He makes suggestions to the president. The president produces or answers the suggestions and then gives us a budget, which we don't even have to listen to. For 8 years, President Obama's budget got a vote, and he never got a single Republican or Democrat to vote for his budget. So I'm hoping that this budget director will do a better job than that.
Senator, if I could follow up, I didn't say during the introduction, I'm Brian Martin, I'm the managing editor here with James Chilton, government reporter. I just wanted to follow up. You say you don't do town halls anymore. Was there a specific conscious decision not to do them, and if so, why?
Well, what I've done is shifted it to a different kind of session. Mm-hmm. At a town hall session, you stand up and you tell what's going on in Washington, which most people already know because they're reading your newspaper. Right. And then they ask a question, you answer it. Then another person asks a question, you answer it. And what I discovered was the people want an opportunity to express their opinions, their ideas, their direction. And so by doing a listening session, they all get to do that. And I'm just recording their thoughts, which is what I think they want me to do, because it's been real well accepted.
Just to clarify, is that an online only, or is that in person?
In person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the public, let's say you held one in Cheyenne, you'd have it at the Civic Center or somewhere where you would just listen to the public asking you questions or
right.
telling you
for most of the time, and at the end I'd make some comments about the comments that were made, and then promise to take a look at all of them.
Okay. And you used to hold town hall sessions. Why the change in format? What's the
Because I discovered that people wanted to tell me, not listen to me.
Oh, okay. All right.
And that's what my job is to listen to them, not to tell them.
Right. And you just don't know when the next one might be. It's going to be.
I don't know what my
schedule.
schedule is yet. If you can't schedule those in advance, it's very difficult.
Can you tell our
Now
reader-
I'm in Wyoming most of the time when we're not in session back there, traveling different parts of the state, and every day is kind of a town hall meeting. I can't go to the grocery store without people coming up and giving me a few suggestions or complaining or having some casework. Casework's actually the biggest thing that I do. People that are having problems with the federal government, and I have specialists that can help solve a lot of those problems.
I did want to ask, what are some of the topics Wyomingites are the most concerned about based on the calls, emails, and other correspondence you've received since President Trump's inauguration? And how do you assure your constituents that their voices are being heard and considered?
Well, they just have to look at my votes and see if they think I'm doing the right thing. I guess I missed the first part of your question.
Are there, what are some of the topics Wyomingites seem to be the most concerned about based on the correspondence you've been receiving? Are there any trends you're noticing? Lots of questions or concerns about one or two particular topics?
Absolutely. Jobs and the economy are clear at the top of the list. The debt comes next. And of course, anytime a nomination for a cabinet member comes up, there are some people that are in favor and there are some people that are against. And I'm always looking to see what their reasons are for being against. Now again, with cabinet members, presidents usually get to have their choice. So what we try to do is put somebody in place for them to do the kind of administration that president wants to have done. We've been 8 years without the administration actually looking at agencies. We've got some tremendous problems out there. And for the most part, he has picked managers, people that have managed a lot of people and looked at businesses and looked at how things are run. And that's going to make a tremendous difference. We've got 96,000 people working in the District of Columbia for the government. I don't think anybody knows what they're doing. We also have some problems where we have, for instance, in housing, we have 160 housing programs administered by 20 agencies. Now, it's not that each of them has 8 or some combination like that. All 20 are involved in all 160. So nobody's setting goals, nobody's checking to see what's done, nobody's seeing if money's being wasted. And I guarantee if you got 160 programs, you got a whole lot of high-paid administrators out there that could be combining into fewer ones. And they're usually in every different department too. When I first got to Washington, there were 119 preschool programs. And I started looking to find out why there were 119. And there are several good ones. Several, not 119. Most of them had evolved into expensive babysitter services. So Senator Kennedy and I started eliminating them. And that's a difficult process because usually the senator that it's named after really gets upset until he finds out what's happened to his program, and then he's not quite so upset. We got that down to 69. I've got it down to 45 cents, but they aren't in the agencies that I have jurisdiction over. So I did get an amendment passed. One of 14 amendments that passed while Harry Reid was the majority leader. And that amendment said that they had to get it down to 5 and put them all into the Department of Education. Hasn't been done yet.
Senator, I don't mean to cut you off, but since we only have about 30 minutes
Sure.
together, I want to make sure we have about 20 minutes to go. So I want to make sure we get to some of the key questions, especially from readers. Another big issue we know is the Affordable Care Act, and
Yes.
the Republicans have made it clear that they're going to repeal it, and the president as well. You have outlined your plans or some ideas for what you would like to do to replace it, but so far we haven't seen an actual bill. Can you talk to us about how you see that unfolding in terms of repealing of the Affordable Care Act and how you think that's going to unfold, and is there a bill in works?
Yes, I got the reconciliation budget passed so that it can so that we can do a reconciliation process and make some major corrections to it. One of the things the president emphasized was if we didn't do anything with Obamacare, it would collapse on its own within 2 years. Now, we've gotten some reports since then that the president was giving it far too much time. It's about to collapse on its own. And he said, we don't treat people that way, so we're going to fix it. So we're going repeal parts of it that need to be changed. We're going to repair part of it. We're going to replace part of it. It was interesting when we were doing the debate, and incidentally, I'd worked on this a long time before we started the Obamacare debate, and I have a 10-step plan on my website that people ought to take a look at. That's being melded in with one's ideas that other people have. In fact, my health person is the one that's kind of doing a matrix to show what ones everybody agrees on, what one few people agree on, and looking for the reasons for the agreement and the disagreement. So we'll have a plan for repairing and replacing Obamacare, and part of the repeal. Now, when we started it on Obamacare, there were 30 million people without insurance. Today, there are 30 million people without insurance. It's a different 30 million. The 30 million that couldn't get insurance have insurance and should be able to get insurance. But there are 30 million people that can't afford it anymore. If you make $20,000 a year and you have a $6,000 deductible, you know you're never going to be able to pay the deductible, so you're never going to be able to get to the insurance. That's not insurance.
Can you tell us where those numbers come from, the 30 million for 30 million? Is there a source we can look at?
We can get you a source on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
Good. I appreciate that. Is there a timeline, just really quickly?
When they're talking about 30 million people being kicked off, there have been 30 million people kicked off already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a timeline for when the replacement or the new whatever the new healthcare program would go into effect?
Paul Ryan says that it's going to be simultaneous, and
but is it going to happen 6 months from
and
now?
the president says contemporaneous. Right. Oh, it has to be done before we can do the next budget, and the next budget should be done by April 15th.
Okay.
So we're talking about some pretty fast time on doing these things.
One thing we've been seeing a lot in the national media is concentration on the issue of leaks, specifically leaks to the national news media. Such leaks appear to be responsible, or at least have some part in the resignation of General Michael Flynn, President Trump's pick for National Security Advisor. Some members of Congress have been calling for greater inquiry as to the substance of the leaks coming out of the administration, while others, including the President himself, have called for greater accountability for the leaks and the people leaking them. How do you feel about the situation? What role do you feel Congress plays in addressing it?
Well, I'm confident that enough of my colleagues are working on that one that I can continue to work on budget and health care and education and tax reform and small business, along with the Homeland Security.
Senator, we've had quite a few questions from readers inquiring about President Trump's decision not to disclose his tax returns. Do you believe he should disclose them, and would you support a law that would require presidential nominees or candidates or sitting presidents to do so?
No, I wouldn't require that.
And why not?
I never have. If candidates for any office want to disclose their tax forms, that's fine. But there's a lot of privacy issues that are involved with that. Just because a person is running for office doesn't mean that their privacy should be taken away. We get to look at ones that are nominees. No, I shouldn't say we do. The Finance Committee gets to look at the tax reform or the tax reports from candidates. And that's where we find out that some of them haven't paid their taxes. One of the most significant one was Secretary of the Treasury Geithner, who didn't pay his own taxes. It wasn't not taxes on employees, didn't pay his own taxes, and was going to be the head of the IRS. That's what the Treasury Department does. But he was still made a cabinet member.
But in light of that answer, you don't feel it's important for the president or the nominees for president to be required to?
Well, just from my financial disclosure forms and the way that they're misinterpreted, and then thinking about how complex his financial forms must be, I'm not sure there's even an accountant out there that could make their way through it with sufficient knowledge other than coming up with new facts.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this because so many people have written in requesting us to ask. I know Russia has been a constant topic of discussion since the closing days of the presidential campaign. Discussions have focused in the media on a wide range of allegations, from Russian hacking of the Democratic National Committee to Michael Flynn's discussion of sanctions with the Russian ambassador prior to the president's inauguration to what sorts of business or financial ties the president may have or had with Russian entities, and how heavy do such allegations weigh on your own mind, and do you see Congress having a role in investigating such claims, whether through standing committees, an independent commission, or special prosecutor?
There are already committees looking into it, and primarily the responsibility of the Intelligence Committee. I'm not on the Intelligence Committee, but I do get to talk to those people, and there are special briefings that were given. I'm always a little disappointed at the special briefings because usually I can read in the paper everything that I was told there, which means it wasn't very special to begin with.
Senator, another common question from readers has to do with public lands and the transfer of public lands to the states. Earlier this month, the representative from Utah withdrew legislation that would transfer about 3 million acres of land from the federal to state ownership. What's your position on federal ownership, and how important is it for the feds to maintain the public lands that we have so many of in Wyoming, or are you a proponent of transferring those lands to the state?
No, I'm not a proponent of it. The education that's needed to do that hasn't begun to be done. The questions haven't been answered about how it would be paid for. But the reason that we get that response is from people that are being shut out of the public lands. And the amount of time that it takes to get any permission to do anything on it, even in non-significant areas. Our last president had a policy that he didn't want anything done with fossil fuels. And he enforced that by making sure that the public lands weren't used for fossil fuels. And that's wrong. There are areas that it would be beneficial to have the exploration, particularly for the national security for the United States. So if the lands are managed properly and not with a top-down no for everything, some of that will go away. There'll always be some interest, since every state from North and South Dakota east has almost all of their public land in state hands. And that's kind of rippled across the United States. And there are people out in this area that think that would be important. I had one candidate for U.S. House of Representatives come to me with a plan that we needed to do that. I said, have you polled that around Wyoming? He said, well, yes, everybody I talked to is interested in that. I said, well, I don't think your poll's very extensive there. And I noticed that Senator Bebout pulled that bill almost immediately in the session, recognizing that it wasn't going to be beneficial. Yeah.
I know the president has concentrated a great deal on economic growth, said he would like to be the greatest jobs president God ever created. I know that there is a downturn in Wyoming's own economic fortunes, and I know locally that's reignited discussion over whether to and what extent the state should seek to diversify its economy. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Congress can do and what work it can do with the president to not only support the existing job sectors in the state, but is there any opportunity at the national level to encourage new industries to take root here?
Well, I've always been in favor of diversifying our economy, even though I'm from the energy state, Campbell County. And I've done some work to do that. I do an annual inventors conference trying to get people to invent something that can be made in Wyoming, shipped all over the world, and then they can live wherever they want, which I know would be Wyoming. And we've had quite a bit of success with that, just finished the 10th one of those. And then I also get the federal government to come to come to Wyoming once a year to see if we don't have something that's better and less expensive than what they're already using. And out of that, we always get some contracts. And that'll be happening this Wednesday in Casper. And it was quite a fight to get them to come to Wyoming. They said, well, you don't have many people. I said, we don't have many people. We got lots of good ideas. And they've been pleased every year that they've been here.
In regard to that, I believe the president has also expressed a desire to see a substantial investment in American infrastructure. I've heard to the tune of $1 trillion. Would you be inclined to support such an initiative? And what is that a reasonable price tag? Is there something more manageable? And how do you offset that?
I'm the budget chairman, and I think that that's an amount that's probably needed. But I haven't figured out how to pay for it. And I'm anxious to see what his pay for is, which we can't learn until his budget director was in place, which just happened last week.
Senator, can you speak directly to the the individuals that President Trump has nominated for his cabinet. You've expressed some frustration that they haven't all been approved, but some of the questions that readers ask specifically focused on Betsy DeVos as Education Secretary, wondering how you could support her as in that cabinet position, especially considering what she said during the confirmation hearing relative to a comment you made, or using you as an example. But can you speak about Betsy DeVos and then just Mr. Trump's cabinet appointees in general? Do you think this is a good cabinet?
I think this is an outstanding cabinet, and I meet with each of the cabinet members, as I have done for previous administrations. One of the things that I try to emphasize during those is the rural nature of Wyoming. Our problems are different here because of the distance between towns and how few people we have, and how we have to work to bring in the kinds of professionals and workers and everybody that we need to be able to do things here. With Ms. DeVos, I emphasized the rural and frontier nature. She got it. I gave her several examples. A month later, when she came up for her hearing, she remembered one of those and mentioned it, and that got her in a lot of trouble. But she was hired because we have the new education bill that we passed. And this is the education bill that moves everything back to the states. The states get to make the decisions now. We got rid of the National School Board. That's the most important thing I think may have done while I've been in Washington. And her job is to make sure that we don't wind up with a National School Board. There are parts of the education department that need to be disassembled now so that that money can be spent back in the states. IDEA, the disabilities education, is one of the things that she was grilled on. Well, the federal government promised to pay a significant part of that. They never have. Now, Wyoming, to its credit, is the only state that's picked up the whole cost for the individuals with disabilities. We should have more money to send back for those kids that have disabilities, and part of that should supplement some of the funds that Wyoming has been spending on its own. So I talked to her about a wide range of things, and I think she'll do a good job of running a department that's not supposed to be the National School Board.
Senator, it's very early in President Trump's term. Obviously, maybe you may say it's too early to tell, but based on what you've seen so far, how has Washington changed? Has it changed? And with a Republican in the White House, how do you think it's going to affect your party's ability to get some things done that you've wanted to get done for the last 8 years or more?
Well, I'm pleased with what we've gotten done so far. One of the things that we complained about were the kinds of regulations that the president was throwing in his last 90 days of being in office. And a lot of those were detrimental to Wyoming. And so we've been in the process of repealing those. That's only been done once before in the history of the United States. And that was when President Clinton was leaving office. He forced through an ergonomics rule at the very end. And I got to reverse that. And so now we're using that same technique on a number of things. And part of it, one of them dealt with the water at mines. And again, that was to keep coal from happening. Another one deals with the flaring of gas. And again, that's to keep carbon fuels from happening. And we're reversing those as fast as we can. Now, for the Senate to reverse something, it takes 12 hours, which is a long day for us, but we've been working through the night to be able to get things done back there.
So there's a perception that the president's doing a lot of this through executive order. How much of it is actually happening in Congress versus executive order, and is that being reported properly out of D.C.?
Well, the part that I'm involved in is what comes through the Congressional Review Act, and I'm pleased with that. I'm also watching what the different committees are proposing for handling some of the regulations that came before the 90 days. As far as the president's executive orders, that's something that every president has done. I remember when President Obama first got elected, the first thing he did was sit down and reverse all of President Bush's executive orders. So it's a common thing. I wish there weren't executive orders, but Congress isn't designed to be fast enough to be able to handle some of the short-term problems. But one of the suggestions that I got in Wyoming was that any president that can't sell his idea for an executive order to Congress within 1 year ought to have an end at that point. I think that's a pretty good idea. Again, I like the ideas that I get when I'm talking to people, whether it's on the street in a special meeting or with different government officials.
Brian briefly mentioned how things have been covered coming out of D.C. by the national media, and as journalists here, I've got to ask, President Trump has made no secret of the fact that he isn't particularly fond of many mainstream media outlets, has taken to frequently referring to mainstream media reports as fake news. In a tweet late last week, he went a step further and referenced the mainstream media, specifically the New York Times, CNN, and NBC News, quote, the enemy of the American people. How do you feel about those sorts of statements? Do you agree with them? How do you distinguish between fake news, slanted coverage, and objective journalism?
I can't answer for the president. That's not my job. I work with the president. I don't work for the president. Nobody in Congress does. That's the way the Constitution's written. But I think that the media is a very important part of what we do. And I try to cooperate with the media to the extent that I possibly can, and I appreciate the way that the Wyoming media gets the information out.
Senator Enzi, I definitely wanted to ask you about the current state of American political discourse. As we know, we've seen very, very divided. I sat in this very room and asked candidates for U.S. House about that issue, and they said, yes, it seems to be getting worse. How has it been since President Trump took office, and what do you think is a solution for bringing people back together in Washington and getting some real things accomplished, or are we headed that way?
It's hard to tell yet, just because of the furor there is over his cabinet appointments, which I think are orchestrated and designed to kind of jam things up. But as far as being able to work on things, I spent last year coming up with budget reform and doing that through committee, doing it in a bipartisan way. And we had a series of budget reforms that would have made a huge difference towards getting control of our spending. And Senator Sanders' presidential candidate ran out, and he came back to be the ranking member, and he hadn't been following all that we'd been doing. So at that point he said, whoa, I don't understand this, so we're not going to do it. I had hoped that we could pass them by unanimous consent one at a time before the election, when none of us knew who the president would be, when none of us knew who the majority would be. And that's what we were working toward, but it got stalled out. But we're still going to do those. And I'm still getting bipartisan support on it, although they all say it's not the right time now. We're not going to do it until after the nominees are done. That's a good idea. It's the tension that's running right now. It wouldn't be a good idea to try and push through any bipartisan things at the moment.
I'm not the one who watches the TV most of the day. Another colleague faces the TV. I know we see Senator Barrasso on television quite often commenting on a variety of different things. And it seems like relatively partisan comments there. We see some other news releases coming from the Wyoming delegation that seem to have a very partisan tone. Is that appropriate, or are you working, Senator, toward finding ways to come together, or is this partisan rhetoric hurtful in terms of being able to get anything done in D.C.?
Well, what we're trying to do right now is get people to understand that we're not the ones holding the nominees up. Mm-hmm. That every president has been able to get his nominees through, essentially. Occasionally there's one that doesn't make it. On the Republican side, if there's somebody that we have a question about, we ask them to drop out, and we've had that success. On their side, they go ahead and we wind up helping improve it.
Do you think it was
There's never been that kind of an effort before on nominees to oppose virtually all of them.
Do you think it was appropriate to hold up President Obama's Supreme Court nominee all through the year last year and then now ask for a quick vote on President Trump's nominee?
I'm not asking for a quick vote. I'm asking for a normal vote. And yes, I think it was appropriate to hold it up. We used Senator Schumer's words about at what point a president should not be appointing a Supreme Court justice. He didn't agree with it after we started using it, but they said that in the last 6 months of a president's term, he shouldn't get to appoint a Supreme Court justice, that the next president should be able to. Now, we didn't know who the next president was going to be, but we said that it'd be a good idea for the next president to be able to put someone in that they think would make a good Supreme Court justice. And I've got to say, I think that he has nominated a spectacular one. I think they're having a lot of trouble coming up with any objections to it. And I'm hopeful that they'll go ahead and let this nominee through, and then when other ones come up, that they'll exert some of the sorts of things that are done as delays.
One question we did get from a few readers, and you may be biased, and I understand, but how do you feel about the concept of imposing term limits for members of Congress?
I'm glad you asked that. I was in the Wyoming legislature when the people of Wyoming imposed term limits. And I watched a number of people in the House who, because of the grandfathering, could have still had some time. And they said, whoa, if that's the way the people in Wyoming feel, I'm out of here. And we had so many people drop out of the House that year, I was in the state Senate, that when we did conference bills, we had to teach them how to do the conference so that we didn't just run over them, that we lost a whole lot of knowledge of the issues when that happened. Now, in Washington, if you impose term limits, you better impose term limits on staff as well, because there are some offices where the staff run the office. And if you get rid of the staff too, you better get rid of the lobbyists, because you don't want them to be the only ones with any historical knowledge of what the issues are. So it's a real difficult thing.
So in your view,
that people have the right every election to do term limits.
Senator, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to ask one last question if I can. What are your thoughts on the new administration's broad crackdown on illegal immigration, and do you share the president's view that we need a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border?
We need some kind of protection on the border down there, and we have complained about immigration for years and not done a great deal about it. In the meantime, there have been a whole bunch of sanctuary cities that have been developed so that if anybody's there, there's no way to get them deported, and that's wrong. We want people from other countries to come to the United States, but we want them to do it legally. And we need to set up a mechanism where the kinds of talents that we need in the United States are expedited. We have a lot of people that are graduating with masters and PhDs in the United States, and as soon as they get them, we kick them out of the country. I really think we ought to staple that to a green card and get them busy here in the United States, inventing and diversifying the economy.
You mentioned to James that you weren't sure where we were going to find the $1 trillion for the infrastructure. Where would we find the money for the wall along the border?
You've heard the president say that Mexico's going to pay for it.
Do you believe that? Do you think he's going to find a way to make that happen?
Actually, there's one of the things that I'm pretty worried about, which is the border adjustment tax that would kind of do that. I don't think that's the right way to do tax reform. I'm hoping they'll take a look at my international tax reform that I did 3 years ago, and it worked that through the Joint Tax Committee to a greater definition than anybody has. In the Finance Committee for Tax Reform, we usually just express a concept, and if the concept gets voted through, then somebody writes the details on it. I don't work my legislation that way. I do the details first, and then see if people will agree with them. And I've got a way to bring some of that money from overseas back, and that would help to pay for a lot of things. Part of which I hope would be tax reform. Part of which I would hope to be to shore up pensions.
Was the president's executive order on immigration proper? Do you think he handled it well?
Well, I've been pleased with what he's done since then. When it failed in the district court and it failed in the circuit court, he didn't say press that on to the Supreme Court. He said, maybe I got it wrong. Well, I don't think he said that. But he said, I'm going to do it differently. And now I'm anxious to see what the different way is. I'm not used to a president that sees a mistake and changes it.
Anything you'd like to add before we wrap up? Oh, sorry.
I have one more follow-up on the Russia question. Do you believe that Russia influenced our elections, and is that something that should be looked into further? I know that you're not on those committees specifically, but do you believe that?
Well, I think we should look into any way that our electoral system can be fooled with. We want all of those. When we've been going to other countries to make sure that their elections were correct. So we ought to be checking our own.
Anything you'd like to share with the Facebook Live audience or with us specifically? Any topics we haven't covered today?
No, I appreciate the questions that you've asked. They're the kinds of questions that I'm getting as I go around to different meetings and to the grocery store and to the schools and things. And so I appreciate the chance to get to answer them to a wider audience.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming by and offering to visit with us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.